Now, if you spend any time working with Bricks Builder, you'll know it's a very solid platform for building WordPress websites. There's a lot of flexibility included in the tool itself. One of the areas that's really powerful is CSS classes. But if you want to take that to another level, maybe you want to take a look at a tool like Advanced Themer. Now, this was released only yesterday, but it is a powerhouse when it comes to extending and expanding what you can do with Bricks Builder. I want to show you some of the things you can do with this and give you a little bit of a flavor for it, because there's so much going on in this tool that, let's be honest about it, I'd have to spend probably the best part of several hours trying to demonstrate how it all works. So if you want to learn more about what this does, and let me sort of take you through and show you how to use this to build sites, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll take a look at doing that if enough people are interested. So Advanced Themer, what can you do with it? Let's take a quick look at the website. Again, link in the description, and you'll find there's an awful lot you can do with it. If you take a look at just the features being listed here, there's an abundance of options available. If we scroll on down, we can find a little bit more about it. So we've got color palettes, CSS variables, styles and classes, tweaks to the builder itself to make it more productive and easier to work with. Okay, so let's go over into a WordPress website where I've already gone ahead and installed Bricks Builder. Once you've installed and activated Advanced Themer, you'll have a couple of new entries inside the dashboard under the Bricks section. You'll see you've got theme settings, color palettes, and the license. The license is just basically where you pop your license key. So let's start off with the color palette option. So what this allows you to do is create color palettes. I mean, you're thinking, well, that's really powerful, Paul. Why do I care? Well, let me just show you why this is useful. Let's go ahead and create a new color palette. We'll give this a name. And underneath you'll see we've got a couple of simple options. The first of all is the label, and then we can choose the color. Give this a name. So we'll call this primary. So we'll set this as our primary color. We'll choose our color from here. You can get a normal color picker. You could drop your hex code in if you want to. Let's pick something like a nice blue. We'll use that as a starting point, and we'll click outside. We'll add another color in. We'll call this secondary. Choose a different color. This time we'll choose something like this purple. Not really too picky about this. And let's add one more in, and we'll just call this neutral. And we'll select a kind of mid-gray that we can use there. Okay, so let's go ahead and publish that, and we've now created our first color palette. So now if we come over to a page, let's go ahead and just insert a section inside here, and in there we're going to go add a heading in. Let's select our heading, and let's come over into the style option, click on the typography and click on the color chip, and you'll see there's our three primary colors. Now you're probably thinking, why do I care about that? Well, this is because this is all using variables. So if you hover over, you can see var, primary, secondary, and neutral. So we're using variable colors. And if you've ever used anything to do with CSS variables, you'll know how powerful and how flexible that actually is. So we can easily go ahead, choose that color from there, and we've now assigned our secondary color to that particular heading. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's come back over and let's change that secondary color to something different. Let's set it to red. We'll update, come back over, and we'll refresh. And you see now our heading has picked up that changing color. So that's pretty cool and relatively useful. However, it does get better than that. If you've ever worked with creating color palettes, you'll know that you're probably going to want to have different shades of the same color or colors to give you more scope over what you can do. And that can be a bit of a pain and long-winded to create. But if we jump into settings, we can go ahead and enable shades. So if we do that and just simply click update, hop back over to our colors, and now we get shades that are lighter and darker based upon the colors that we set up, our primary, secondary, and so on. So we haven't had to do anything other than select that option, and now we have all these color variations. So now if we come back into our site and refresh that page we're working on, select our heading one more time, come back into our styles and come into our typography and our colors. You can see there's all the color options available to you, and we can use any of these shades that we want. And again, all of these are using variables, so it's very easy to globally use and globally change these colors with one simple change in the back end in the color palette settings. It's so quick and easy to work with. And like I say, working with variables is just so much more flexible when you start working with CSS. Once you get used to it, you really can't go back to just standard basic colors. Now, again, underneath the color palette, if we come into settings, if we want to use prefixes to avoid any kind of clashes with any other CSS variables we may be using, we can drop that inside there. And we can also enable dark mode. So if we have a dark mode and a light mode, and we want to use one of the features that you have with Advanced Thema, which is a dark light mode switcher, you can enable that, and then you can create your different color palettes. I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. Just know that it's there if you want to have that easy switch between dark and light mode. Okay, so that's the color palette side of things. Pretty cool. But the real power of this is where we start to come into the theme settings. If we go in here, you'll find we now have a lot of different options. First of all, our typography, and this is where we can set up our global standard for typography. So you can see our font for label H1, H2, H3, and so on, and right the way through. The nice thing with this is because this is using ACF or Advanced Custom Fields to kind of build this whole interface, we can very easily just keep on adding and creating our own custom typographic variables or color variables or anything we want inside here. It's all available to us to continue to expand this beyond what we have as a starting point. And I think that's what we need to understand with Advanced Thema over maybe some of the other tools that are out there. This is more a system for being able to totally start from scratch should you want to, or you can use what it has, which is kind of the basic starting points based upon things like material UI and so on. So kind of best practices for creating these kind of design systems for your website. But as you can see, we've got a minimum and a maximum value. So even though this is using pixel values, it is changing things over to rems on the actual site itself. It's just basing these values to make it kind of more understandable for you and I when we set things up. And this is using clamp as well. So we've got clamp, so it'll automatically convert any kind of values we use into clamp. So we have full scalability. And this basically sets the minimum value on so your mobile devices and your smallest devices to your maximum value on your desktops and so on. So you can set that, and as things scale, this will scale accordingly, and so will your typography. So this is where the benefit of using, again, these variables makes the whole process of scaling a more fluid way of working. And if you don't understand how this all works, this is basically doing the heavy lifting for you. All you do is pop in some values and use that as a basis. Pretty cool. But the next thing is you may be thinking, well, okay, how do I actually go about using this in my designs? So let's quickly jump over back into that page, see how you can use it before we move on and dig in a little deeper some of the other options, because the process is basically the same. So we come back over, let's select our heading, and let's come over into where we normally go, which is our typography. Now you can see we've got font size, nothing is currently set, so it's using the standard default values you may have set up. You'll notice we get this little V symbol. This is not there by default. I'll show you how to switch all these on later. But this just gives us immediate access to the variables that we've got set up. So for the font sizes, for example, I can click on there, and this gives me now all the different variables. I can filter this. Any ones that I create personally will be listed inside here based upon the relevant section. So typography, spacing, border radiuses, and so on. So what we can say is now, we'll say this is the font H2, for example. We'll select that, and boom, that now gives us our typography style size. If we change the size of our view, you can see that typography changes accordingly based upon that minimum and the maximum value. If we take a look at the font size, this is where we're using, again, variables. So it's using the variable of font H2. If I want to change that, font H1, we get the bigger variation. Come back in, font H5, bigger, smaller variation. Now, obviously, this isn't changing the actual HTML code behind it. It's just changing the styling, the size, and so on. So what we can do is we can still come into our options under content, and we can choose what we want. So this could still be a H1, but it's styled in that H3 sizing. Good for semantics as well, because we can use these variables to deal with the styling, and we can deal with the HTML then to create the hierarchy of our content and information on our site and our page. So that's how we access these different variables, simply coming in and choosing the options there. Same thing goes for layout. If we come into our margins, for example, you can see, again, I've got these variables selected. So if I want to apply some spacing around this, I can come in, let's link the top two, click on there, and I can say, I want to use this gap, for example, medium 1. Click, and we now have the spacing set above and below using that variable. And as you can see, the variable's available to us. We can change this at any point. We can apply it on individual sides. We can have different variables. So for example, on the left and right hand sides, we might want to have something completely different, like this XL. And now we get a different variation on there. And again, you can see, we can visually see when we hover over what the spacing actually is. So once you start working with these kinds of variables, It really does make the whole process so quick and easy to set up. And then when you want to make sweeping changes to your overall design, you simply come over into the settings and you can change your typography, your spacing, your border radiuses, all those kinds of good things. So coming over to the spacing, which we've just seen now on the front end side of things, if we come in here, this is where those different variables are actually being set up. And we get a nice little preview underneath to show us visually the different distances above, below, left, right, whatever it is. And again, you can set your minimum and your maximum, so you can have that kind of flexibility going on. And as you can see, we've got a range of different ones created. And if you want to add a new one in, all we need to do is click on Add New Spacing, fill in the values you want, change the minimum and the maximum, and boom, we are done. If we want to get rid of any of these, we can click to remove it, confirm, and it's gone. So we have total flexibility over how this all works. Same thing goes then if we come into border radius. You can see we've got these different border radiuses set up. So one for an image, one for a card, one for a button. But these are just names. They can be used anywhere where you want to put a border radius. So you could easily use the radius BTN on an image. Doesn't really matter. You could use the radius card on a button. Makes no difference. These are just values and you can name them what you want. So you can see I've created one called radius-image-8, set the minimum and the maximum values to 8 pixels, and that now gives me a nice rounded edge on anything I want to apply it to. So again, let me just quickly show you. Let's go and insert an image. There's our image. Let's go and select an image from our library. With the image selected, all I need to do is come into Style, come in where I normally would, which is going into the borders, click inside, choose the option to link these together, and again, you see we've got these variables, so I can click and I can set my border radius 8, and now we have an 8 pixel border radius set around on that particular image. And if I come in and I change that, that'll update on the screen itself and throughout our entire site. So hopefully you can see why these variables are just so useful. Now you can also create custom variables. So if they don't kind of fit into the typography, spacing, or radius, you can create whatever variables you want and just assign them wherever you want to use them. It really is that simple. You click Add a Category, create your category, then you add your variables. Simple. So you can organize these in any way that you want. So total flexibility is given to you using this kind of way of working. And again, we've got the easy way of adding and removing anything we do. And then once we're happy, we click Save Setting. Job done. You get the picture. Now, grids are really, really useful. By default, you'll have just one grid set up inside you, but you can create as many as you want. Now, the beauty of this is if you want to create multi-column, sort of like layouts, this is going to do it all for you. So again, let me just quickly demonstrate what I'm talking about. So there we go. We've got a really ugly example now. I've got a simple section with a container, 2 blocks inside it, and inside each of those blocks, we've got a title, an image, and some content. Now, if we wanted to sort of set these side by side, we normally come into the content, we'd set these to be a column or a row, we'd set the sort of flexbox options we want, but there's an easier way. Making sure the container is selected, simply come over to our CSS classes, and you can see inside there, I've got grid 2 and grid 3, which relates to what we've got inside here. So grid 2, grid 3. If I just choose grid 2, we immediately get a 2-column grid and everything is set up with the spacing and everything all configured for us. If I want to adjust anything on there, again, let's just go and save that. If I come over here and I say I want to change this to be a gap row of 4 rems, for example, I can do that. And we'll save our settings, come back in, we'll refresh the editor, and we now have a bigger gap in between. Really quite simple. And this is all totally responsive. So if we go into a different mode, you can see they're stacked side by side, stacked one above the other. So all the things you'd expect, totally responsive in the way that you want it to be. And then you can just control all the aspects of this the way that you want to. So that's using the grid classes. And like I said, you can create as many of these as you want to, and then you can assign them wherever you want. And as with everything, make a change inside the settings and everywhere in your site will update accordingly. Again, just going back, these variables are just so flexible. Okay, so after that, we've got our class importer, which if you want to export classes and then import them, you can do that inside here, so you can add a new CSS class. Pretty obvious, I think. Now, the resources allows you to create galleries and save those with images, and then you can use those inside the editor itself. I'm not going to worry too much about that. I think that's probably less important than some of these other options. If we come into the builder tweaks, though, and if you take a look at my editor, you can see I've got a lot more options across the top, options over on the right hand side, and also different options inside the interface itself. Things like we've got the little V switch symbols. We want to sort of change things like any of the sort of styling and the variables and so on, and also these options across the top. These are all tweaks that enhance or change the way that the interface actually works. So if we come into the settings one more time, You can see we can enable global features like grid guides, X mode, advanced CSS, dark mode, and so on. If we turn any of these off, so for example, we don't want dark mode, we don't want resources, and we don't want the AI panel checker or the contrast checker, let's just go and save things back into the editor. And you can see some of the options now have been taken off because we haven't enabled them. You'll also notice we've got a grid and column option. So if you like to work with grids, especially if you're coming from something like Figma and you set your layout grids, you can enable that inside here. You can see we've got a 12 column grid. And again, you can customize these by using the options inside here. So again, full control over customizing these different things. You'll see in classes and styles, you can enable extended global classes and styles, enable find and replace styles, reorder. There's an abundance of different options. This enable CSS variable picker is what you've seen that I've shown you several times inside here, which is where we've got the option to drop down and just pick what we want from our CSS variables. I would highly recommend enabling that just because it just makes the whole process of picking those variables a easy option. So there are tons and tons and tons of options. Enabling shortcuts, you've got pseudo element shortcuts, which is what you can effectively see here. So instead of having to go into the pseudo elements at the top, you can simply select what you want from here. So your active, your before and after, your hover effect, and so on. You can search for settings, you can interactions, you've got your conditions. All these can be just chosen inside here instead of having to dig deeper into the interface to get access to them. So from a productivity point of view, this again is really useful. Lorem ipsum generator, if you've got an account with ChatGPT, you can connect up the AI and have AI generated content directly inside the editor itself. You can see there's a lot inside here. If you want to create custom shortcuts, you can do, or you can go with your own shortcuts as standard. You can enable strict editor. You can change the logo if you want to brand this the way that you want. And if you come into settings, there's even more options inside here, like the base font size, the minimum and maximum viewport widths, enabling and disabling elements, setting the position, the role permissions, and so on. You kind of get the picture. There's a hell of a lot inside here. So if you do get this, I would really recommend digging in. Take a look at the website first of all to see what's on offer. Okay, so that's basically most of what I wanted to show you. But there is one other thing that I think is very, very useful. When you're on any page on your site, something you're working on, something maybe you want to sort of talk back and forth with a client with, if you come up to advanced theme at the top and choose the option to enable front-end playground, we get a new option in the bottom right-hand corner. You get this little cog. Click and we get this palette popping out. Now this references a lot of what we have on the back end. So a lot of those variables and so on are accessible inside here. You can see there's our 3 colors we created for our color palette. We click to expand them. There's all our options for the various different colors inside that particular selected color. And you can see you've got options to copy this. You can refresh it and you can bin it from here if you want to. Pretty cool. You've got the same kind of thing then for your typography, so you can customize and edit your typography style. So whatever size you're using, you can target that and you can make changes inside here just to see what it looks like. You don't have to save it. Great if you prototype it and you want to then liaise with a client to get feedback. This is a good way of being able to do that. Same thing goes for spacing. It goes for your border radiuses. You've got miscellaneous inside here. Now there's no miscellaneous variables because I haven't created any, but they're available when you do. Your grids are inside here, so you can set the number of columns, your gaps and so on, and your classes will all be listed inside here as well. Across the top then, we've got more options. You've got your color lab, which allows you to find different colors and create different color variations and luminance and saturation and all manner of different things. You can choose the color converter and you can convert colors. You've got the option for the scale generator for color scales if you want to use that. You've got your color palette generator, which, as its name would suggest, allows you to create color palettes based upon your base color. And you can create variations upon them. You can set the distance, how far apart those colors actually are from each other, and the various different kinds of schemes. So there's an abundance of options here. You've also got color palettes, which are popular color palettes you can pick and choose from. If you don't have a particularly good, solid idea, you can use this, or you can just grab a color and then use the other options inside here to refine and tweak from there. Contrast checker, which is great if you want to make sure that the contrast on your site is enough for people that may be visually impaired. And then you've got the option to export this, and you can go to support if you want to. And you can also switch between light and dark modes if you're using that. Can you kind of get there's a lot available here? And the final thing I want to show you is if we come back into the dashboard, scroll right the way down, we've got some additional sort of elements we can access: the dark mode toggle, the dark mode button, color swatch generator, preset swatch, theme editor, and color palette. There's a lot of options. So if you want to use this to create a style guide, you can use the options inside here. There's so much. It would just take a long time to cover everything in so much more detail. But if you would like me to create a video, a dedicated video on how you could use this in combination with bricks to create a fully fledged design, let me know in the comment section below, and I will do my best to take a look at creating something like that for you. But as always, if you've got any comments, questions for myself, or hopefully Maxime, who will be checking this out and being involved in the comment section, please do drop those down below in the comments. As always, all applicable links are in the description. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.